Hey, this is Shamika and John with A Better Glen, and we want out the watch session or watch party that we had a series 1619. So to bring everyone up to speed, A Better Glen in College of Georgia, diversity, equity, and inclusion programming. We are watch parties to watch the documentaries of publication 1619, and we had our first session this where we watched the first episode on democracy. We had about 4 really diverse group in age and in race, and had some really significant conversations that we want to bring you into. So also going to tell you a little episode. So spoiler alert, but also encourage, and then talk about what we're doing next. So I'm gonna pass it to John. Kick us off with some themes that we heard.
Yeah, so we were able to gather together as groups at the college after we were able to listen in on the first session. The first session was about democracy. We're going to talk about what the actual episode entailed, but we were able to sit down, have conversations with smaller groups around that first session, and we were able to hear some really good feedback for some folks. Shamika, I know that one
Yeah.
group had mentioned, somebody in one group mentioned that what that documentary demonstrated to them is that history isn't dead, that it's
Mm-hmm.
alive and it's being made even now. Like that was one of the pieces of feedback that really had an impact on me. It was like, hey, we are not only seeing history in this documentary, but we're also living history ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Participants was an older lady. I believe she might have been one of the oldest in the room, and uh, she accounted her experience of integrated school here, right in Glenn County. Um, Went to, I believe it was Risley. The books that they were provided were passed down um, from used books that included notes in the margins from students
Mhm.
that live in the same conditions that she lived in. So to hear about her experience and to also with the present day experience of books being banned, right, and being a
Mhm.
part of our current history of still being segregated, to have her in that space and really personify that statement that history is right now. It's in the present.
Yeah, and even to solidify that, I think someone had mentioned that the lady that was being interviewed, I think her name was Helen, correct?
In the documentary, yes.
Yeah, so she actually helped integrate University of Georgia. And
Hmm.
when we think about desegregation and integration, folks always think about that happened so long ago.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
like she was sitting at the table, like young and spry looking, and she was
Hmm.
someone who integrated the University of Georgia, which for a lot of folks who are in Glenn County kind of hits close to home. People like the Georgia football team, but they really weren't integrated back in the 60s. And she's one of the folks who helped
Hmm.
integrate it, and now she's working on helping to make sure that democracy is held up in Georgia. So even seeing that was really just like, wow, history isn't like this type of history isn't too long ago. Like there are
Not at
living folks who lived
all.
through it. Yeah, yeah.
Not at all. Another highlight in the documentary was a gentleman by the name of Arthur Cotton, who was a part of CC. Help me with that acronym.
SNCC.
Student
Yep, Student Nonviolent
Nonviolent
Coordinating Committee.
Coordinating Committee. Committee, who played an integral role, particularly in the South, around voting rights. And he talked about his experience at 18 years old, uh, experience. He went to register folks to vote and shared this story about being in some poor conditions, to say the least, in terms of poor conditions. He had said was that the Hannah Jones asked, what does he hope for, or what does he see after experiencing the front lines, and he said something to the effect that he was saddened that he won't see the democracy that he was fighting for, right? And the voter suppression that's happening now, which is a throwback to things that he was fighting for, and I won't see that in my lifetime, right? And to see this older man who started this fight at AB, I would think probably in his 80s, to say that I won't see this in my lifetime. So span of like this life work and how long, and he said democracy is a fight, right? It's something that we have to continue to be
in. No, that was good. So that's what the episode was about, democracy, and that's how I just like the way she opened the episode. When in the beginning of the episode, she said, "It was by virtue of our bondage that we became the most American of all." Like, that really struck me when she said that. Like, and that's what shaped the outline for the entire episode, was like, hey, we actually demonstrated to other Americans what democracy looked like. And that came through our own oppression and our own bondage. What'd you think about that when she said that?
Yeah, I thought about that sort of example of what we have experienced to help. Freedom is the foundation of democracy, and it's something that we continue to fight for and show the ways in which we are free, and more importantly, the ways in which we are, right? And so to speak about that foundation, and I think one of the is that even in our fight for freedom and in our fight for democracy, an example and a blueprint of the fights for other marginalized groups. You would not have the right for narrative if you didn't have the fight for civil rights that we as Black folks put forward. So absolutely, like, we're foundational to this country, and foundation to democracy and freedom, right?
Yeah, in addition to that, I think one of the things that really struck me, as we talk about the documentary itself, one of the things that struck me was this idea that she talked about her dad flying this American flag in front of his house. And we saw that image early on in the film. And she said, I just didn't understand why he did that. Like, why would you fly a flag in front of your house? Even today, we think about folks flying flags in front of the homes, and like, we're like, well, America hasn't really been good to Black folks, right? But here you have this Black man who's flying a flag in front of his home, and her uncles kind of give her some perspective on that, right? They say, hey, he understood that he was fighting not just for his country, but he was serving his people, right? And I think one of her uncles said, just because you serve your country doesn't mean your country serves you. I was like, ooh,
right.
That's a mic drop moment right there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and then you even our fight in some ways have been weaponized. Like when she Lord Dunmore, right, and telling the folks, playing both sides, enslaved Black folks, hey, you can fight, fight for your freedom, and then also intended to say to put fear into the colonists and say, oh, right? So even our fight from the
mm,
very big organized
mm,
against us,
mm,
um, uh, and fear that certainly
mm.
that ultimately drives policies, and then that gets into the other episodes, our experience here in America by way of policies. Um,
Mm. Yeah.
so
Yeah. I think um, a lot of people probably didn't know about that Ethiopian regiment either.
hmm
I
hmm
thought that was a really good piece of history in terms of them being recruited to fight and actually defeating some of the colonists there in Virginia. And I thought that was that gave me a good little chuckle to kind of see that.
hmm
And that's stuff that you certainly don't hear in the history books. And I think that's what she was getting at, right? Is that
hmm
all this beautiful history in Williamsburg and what has been erased has been a good substantial portion of that history, which were enslaved people who were there
hmm
in Williamsburg and actually helped move us towards the Revolutionary War ultimately.
Yeah.
So I thought that was definitely a powerful moment, just kind of thinking through that, man, our resistance has been something that has been not documented in our history books,
hmm
but it certainly doesn't mean that it was not present in our country.
Right.
So I'm just grateful that she was able to kind of tell that story even succinctly.
Yeah, and the documentary, it put out so many jewels that do one thing very deeply, and so it does encourage you to take some of this learn your own hands. And one of those things um, that made me think about what you had just fight for resistance isn't documented, but also our experience on this American soil. America did not start with our enslavement, and she around this book that everyone should certainly for the Mayflower that really
Mm,
does speak to our existence that is enslavement, and so I think that's very powerful because in some history there's an active pursuit to erase our history and pursuit to talk about it from a space of deficit, like uh, um, without speaking about that resistance that we have always been
mm,
fighting for.
mm. Yep. She also mentioned how we define citizenship in our
Oh
country.
yes,
Um,
yes,
she said we define citizenship by the ability to cast a vote or a ballot. Man, that right
yes.
there was really just a moment where I was like, man, that is exactly what it is. Like being able to a democracy, being able to participate in the democratic process at its ground or base level is being able to cast your ballot. And when you're unable to do that, then you have to question whether or not we have a democracy,
Mm.
right?
We think
So,
about one
so
of the. Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was just thinking about one of the first rights that are taken away um,
Mm,
is the right and what we try to restore. We think about
mm,
our brothers and sisters that get incarcerated. First thing to be taken away is the right to vote, right? And if
mm,
the right to vote defines citizen, your place in society.
mm. So I guess that's the question. Are you a citizen if you don't, if
Yeah.
you are unable to
Oh.
vote? And we call, a lot of people who do kind of restorative programs call them returning citizens.
hmm
But if your citizenship is defined by your ability to cast a ballot, then are you a citizen if you return to society and you're unable to vote because of your
mm
record?
mm
That's the question.
mm. Listen. Now. So is it a return to enslavement?
I mean,
Oh
you
Lord.
you might want to call it what it is because you're being freed from a facility but you're not being freed to citizenry.
Mm. And you still owe restitution.
Still, oh,
So you got to work, you got to pay restitution.
mm, mm. Yeah, yeah.
So even so, nothing.
And it's not just,
Mm,
here's the thing, it's not even just formerly incarcerated folks. Like we saw this in the documentary with our elderly, with folks
yes.
who live in environments where they can barely get to the poll,
Right.
and they show up on the morning of voting and they're told that they're at the wrong precinct, and
Hmm.
being told you got to go 20 miles away to vote. And these folks live
Hmm.
in housing that's across the street from where they usually vote. They don't have
Hmm.
transportation. Many of them are disabled in wheelchairs, right?
Hmm.
And now they tell them, well, you can cast a provisional vote, but you got to come back at 5 o'clock.
Hmm.
So go home,
Yeah.
come back 8 hours later.
Hmm.
And many of them will try to, but then even then it's going to be provisional. And that's what we saw in the
Hmm.
documentary. Like we saw folks who were trying to make sure that they were able to vote at the precinct that is their home precinct. But there were other folks who were on the election committee who were telling
Hmm.
them, well, these are the rules. And those rules really prevent folks, they're layers, right? Because now I got to get back
Hmm.
up out my house and come back at 5 o'clock. And even when I vote, there's another committee that has to say that my vote is valid.
Hmm.
So
Well,
just that barrier to citizenship there with that.
it shows how deep the voter suppression strategies are, right? Because not only was
Mm,
this was a facility or an apartment complex, if you will, citizens,
mm,
and we know the population that votes most frequent, African American, Black communities, are older people, and so it is an
mm-hmm,
of effort, because if you got 300 units in there, there
mm,
and it's these folks have to be 60 plus to live in. You have already strategically knocked out 300 votes.
mm, mm. Yeah.
The so the suppression tactics, which was the other piece, a part of the doc. The pieces around the literacy, right, provisions that
Mm,
was in the Jim
mm,
Crow era, to say that folks couldn't vote if they couldn't uh, read, targeted folks that had just
mm,
come out of enslavement, because to read was to know how to read was illegal. And so you see
mm,
all of these suppression documentary, and you start to see how they then translate to modern suppressive strategies, where it's really just a blueprint. Like, it's the stuff that is happening for us.
mm.
Um,
Wow. Yeah, so the
yeah.
grandfather clauses,
Hmm.
the literacy test, the poll taxes become different in practice, but similar in impact.
That's
So
right.
you're
The spirit
requiring
remains the same.
IDs for absentee ballots for folks who might not necessarily have those type of identifications, right?
Hmm.
Things that you're requiring at a state level for older people who may not have them, which means they cannot vote. It amounts to a poll tax. It amounts to
Hmm.
a literacy test, things that are going to become barriers. And that's what people need to understand. Like, these things are race neutral in language, but
Hmm.
impact a significant portion of our population, certain race, in the way that it's practiced. And when you have something that's race neutral on its face, but impacts a certain demographic in a way that is detrimental to that demographic, then that is, first of all, immoral and unethical, and becomes illegal. And I don't think that a lot of people understand that. Well, the law says this. It just seems like it's a simple law, but who is it
Hmm.
impacting is the question. And that's what we need to look at, is not the law in the letter, but the law in the impact, right?
Yep. Yeah, one of the
Yeah.
statements that she opens up in the documentary, and I think this might be connect some of the chats that folks are putting in, and Leon put
Mm-hmm.
13th Amendment as clear as day. The process to enslave was changed once slaves were freed. Right, and one of the statements that she opened up the documentary and said, more than almost nothing, almost nothing in our country has been left untouched. Slavery.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah.
And that is
Yeah.
exactly a legacy that Leon is speaking to.
Yeah. And Susan says, hey, requiring a state ID is the same as a poll tax, just like I just mentioned. Like
Right.
it it looks like it's neutral. Hey, everybody has an ID. Well, that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you do
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean that somebody in this elderly community who might not need one has one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we think so individualistically when we think about these laws and their impact, and we
Mm-hmm.
really need to think collectively. If we are a democracy, if we are a community, if we're thinking about things democratically, we got to understand the impact that it has across the board, right? Here's something else that she said that really got a nice response from me when I was listening. She said, "White freedom in America was predicated on Black slavery.
Mm-hmm.
That their freedom is tied inextricably to Black slavery." So this idea of concept of freedom, which we hear a lot these days, like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, freedom, 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 right? Well, that freedom has always been tied to Black enslavement in our country.
Mm-hmm.
And it even plays itself out today. Like obviously there are no cotton fields and shackles, but you better believe that there are modern day forms of slavery happening even in the
Mm-hmm.
21st century in 2022. And that freedom that they're experiencing is predicated on that. Like that's what's built the foundation of our country, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what's really shaped the policies that you're seeing come forth even today from our legislature.
Yep. Naming that concept. This is there's so many jewels because there's an
Mm,
episode on Catholic. I take a deeper dive into this, but this really understanding that not only is defined by enslavement, but
mm,
enslavement has built just also the definition of someone's freedom to be free from the debt, right? And she talks about
mm,
the black body financing of the black what built Wall Street.
mm,
So even
mhm,
as we think about, folks like to really brag about being stockbrokers, and they an investor. They have to really like black folks too, right? Like the
mm,
black brag,
mm,
like all of that is built on the enslavement of our ancestors. Not
mm,
only is freedom defined by us, but the functioning of this monetary system, the value in dollars, the values in stock, all of those things
mm,
are built upon it.
mm. Yeah, and what you see in less than a decade in our country from its founding is the move from tobacco to cotton
Mm,
in our
mm,
country.
mhm,
And once
mhm.
that happened, the economy in the South really drove our nation. That the production of cotton and the cotton gin really was what
Mhm,
provided the economic means through which, as you mentioned,
mhm.
the stock market came to be, or any industrial
Right.
revolution came to be, because that served as the foundation. I'm talking about millions of dollars
Mhm.
being moved through black bodies. Think about that.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Um, so one other quote I had: Black Americans have always believed in this country with a faith that it did not deserve.
Mm,
Whew. Because even when she talked about Lincoln, right? She said, "Hey, Lincoln came to us and was like, hey, I'll let y'all go, but can y'all go back to Africa?"
Right.
And and folks really don't know that. Like he did say that. Had a meeting
Yes, he
with a
did.
group of pastors. And generally, when you
Yes,
have
he did.
leadership do that, they grab a group that they feel like is going to represent us for the culture,
Uh-huh.
right? So he grabbed 5
The
pastors
show.
and leaders, the chosen ones, and brought them to the
Uh-huh.
White House and said, "Hey, here's an idea I have."
Uh-huh.
And he didn't know that one of them was going to say, "Nah, bro, we ain't doing that. We ain't going nowhere." So you're going to have to figure this
We
out
built
without
this.
us going in it.
We built this.
We built this and we ain't going nowhere. But I think that's where she follows up with that quote where it's like, hey, we've always believed in this country with a faith that it did not deserve. Like, hey, we built this. We think we can work in this democracy if y'all leave us alone and allow us to be able to be full citizens in this country. And that's what the
Yep.
Reconstruction was about. That's what the civil rights movement was about. Was all we wanted was full rights and citizenry so we can actually operate within this democracy without hindrances.
Mm-hmm. Now I got to ask you about this, John, because this was the piece that like the stomach. I felt my stomach in my throat when she talked about sort of, or she was interviewing. It was some professors, and I can't. They were out of, but they talked about these three tenets of fascism. Kind of went, the documentary kind of went from this fight to democracy to, why do we still need to fight for our democracy? Why are we still, in a lot of ways, not free? Talking about these 3 tenets of fascism, and this is not by any means to start, talking about other. But she talked about sort of 3 things, and I'm trying and I articulate them all in the best way. But one of the things that I had heard, this concept of fascism and what does it get to sort of start to erode a democracy or take down a democracy, right? It's the questioning of those in power and their intellect, their citizenship, right? So it talked about when Obama was running for president, and there was all birth certificate. Like he needed to prove
that he was a citizen. Why don't he just show his birth certificate?
He needed to
Yeah.
prove that
Yeah.
he belonged, right? And so came out of that, right, to start to erode our belief in our leaders. Another thing was sort of this concept of media, right? Make it great again, make it something to sort of back, right? So so it was intriguing, and we that in our group, and how that and what that looks like local. And there was some statements around feeling like in our county commissioners. It's all no female representation, and certainly no representation of diversity by race, and in terms of representing the population that you're speaking of. A conversation that was connecting to sort of the concept of challenging Obama's in our local community, how people are quickly labeled as outsiders, right?
Outsiders.
And that talk being rhetoric of fascism. So I'm curious what some of the things that you heard and some pieces that stood out.
Yeah, I thought that
remember
was a really intriguing conversation towards the end of the documentary with those 2 professors, and I actually went and got their book. And so I think they said it was 4 things. The person won't accept the election results.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
That they condone or either threaten violence, when it
Oh,
happens,
how did I
that
forget
they
those two?
threat they threaten civil liberties, and then
Hmm.
finally, you as you mentioned, they challenge the legitimacy of their opponents. So he
Hmm.
said, when you have those four things, that's when democracy in its purest form is threatened the most. And it's
Hmm.
crazy because all of that stuff is couched in the language of freedom and democracy, but it
Hmm.
actually
Hmm.
threatens the democracy by which we were built and founded.
Hmm.
And so I thought that those 4 points were really compelling because we had never seen anything the likes of that before. Like, I think that one of the things about our country that has been good about the political process is that those who run for office have always conceded and always felt like, hey, if that's what the people want and the people voted in that way,
Hmm.
then I am going to accept those results. We haven't
Hmm.
had that happen. And when she said over 200 folks ran for office who didn't think that the 2020 results were legitimate
Right.
the next year, I think we're moving into dangerous territory. And again, like, we're
Hmm.
nonpartisan. Don't matter either side. If they're doing that, then we're no longer living in a democracy, in a country that really values the voice that matters the most, Tamika, with people. And
Hmm.
that's why we're here. We want to hear from the people. We're tired of politicians shaping what the community looks like. Like, it should be the people
Hmm.
that kind of runs the local community, state community, and the federal.
Yeah. And I think, when we talk about, so this conversation we were having about representation in our county commission, and certainly in some other one of the things that a participant pointed out. But when we think about that, and it's having representation from the people, and also when you think about the statistics that are put in other spaces that we don't even think about, that prohibit the voice of the people speaking up. So
Mm,
looking at like local county boards where board meetings happen, right? That's automatically going to attract a person who has a schedule and likely is going to be a retired individual. If they're retired, that also is going to age demographic of their representation, because most of the folks that they are is an older population. So young folks are not going to be represented in those discussions. Just by way
mm,
of having that flexibility is also going to place a certain racial demographic on these boards. And so people may not even think about the ways in which that's suppression, but they
mm,
certainly are, if not in impact around getting the voice that's representative of the people. And that's the representation of
mm,
the people, meaning all folks that these make up this country are represented. So it was really ways that, again, the
mm,
foundation of this country is applicable. It touches everything
mm.
that we may unconsciously. Uh,
Yeah, let's revisit MacArthur Cotton's story
oh
here for a
yes,
second,
yeah, yeah.
because as he was sitting there interviewing him, she almost choked up, and I almost did
Mhm.
too. Um,
Mhm.
First of all, just hearing about the treatment that folks got for just wanting to register to vote.
Mhm.
Can you imagine going to maximum security prison as a result of trying to exercise a civic duty that our country was
On
built
death
on?
row,
Right,
death
right.
row.
Wasn't even just like a regular in-town jail. They sent them to the worst
Right.
prison in that area and on
Mhm.
death row. And in
Mhm.
addition to that, tortured this man in prison. And if it wasn't for
Mhm.
citizens coming in from the outside just to check on him, he may be dead this day just
That's right.
because he wanted to vote. And he
That's
said
right.
this in the documentary. He said, man, this was state sponsored terrorism. Whew.
Terror. Yes,
Man, I was like,
state sponsored for sure. Because I
mm,
like number one, I'm a taxpayer, so that means I'm pouring into the state sponsored system of
mm,
terror, and there, but
mm,
I am paying into this. How
wow.
how do I that can pay even more because I'm investing in it, and it ain't by choice. It's as a citizen, I must
Mm.
fund these.
Whew,
But God,
I'm funding my own
state,
oppression?
I'm funding my own oppression. State sponsored terror.
Jeez.
Yeah, I mean, in his eyes, if you watch that documentary and look into his eyes as he's speaking, right?
Mm,
This man
mm,
was hung upside down
mm,
um,
mm,
in a jail cell that um, and not fed for days. And when she was interviewing Harry, which was the other piece of this, she, as she was trying to hold back the tears, and she just said, "I'm so sorry. You should be glad we sacrificed." And
yeah.
that just
Oh,
that made me
goodness.
weak.
Yeah, it
Sacrifice.
really is. But you know what that does though, as we're talking, and we're gonna talk about some of the work that we've done the past couple of years with Get Out the Vote and voter engagement, because we want to be mindful of this too, Shamika. Like, we're both Gen Xers, right? Um, and that moves us hearing that, right? And we've heard over the past several years, we've heard our parents say people died for this or people
Yeah.
suffered for this, right? But as we're talking to younger folks, that doesn't seem like it gets that visceral of a reaction, right? So the question becomes, how do we move them with narrative, with story, in a way that helps them understand that this is their primary modes of empowerment in the local community? Apart from the trope of people died for this, people suffered for this, what is it that's going to move them?
Yeah, I think we have to ask them what matters to them most.
Mm,
What impacts them. And some of that, we've heard that our young folks that we support by way of the social justice participated in an event, I think it was last week,
mm,
where they helped conversations. Um, and one of the young ladies spoke about her desire for education to be equitable.
mm,
That folks, young people like herself, have access to quality, to um, um, just other students learning, right? And so when I think about that and the opportunity to connect what her desires are, then I think we have to be intentional about helping folks understand these laws that are, or these policies that are being promoted, or current laws, and how
mm,
candidates stand on these things. How does that impact? And a
mm.
lot of it comes
Yeah.
through funding, right? And so you get into the nuance of necessarily understand that.
Mm,
But I think that these young people could be the key, number one, to helping us
mm,
translate the message.
mm,
Um,
mm,
have to get them more into conversations like this. We have to have them watch party last Sunday, and what you heard and what we know, granted, is that the folks that has always been pivotal in these movements, 17, 18, 19-year-olds, it's their age, right? But if you're seeing this black news folks talking about what they did 40 plus years ago and it's in black and white, then your
Mm,
mind automatically, all I see is what's in front of me. I see this 80-year-old man talking about what he did when he was 17,
mm,
right? But
mm.
if they're talking with a young lady that was with like Miss Helen, a young person beside her, uh, Miss Helen that was
It's
that
different.
works, I believe it hits different. She
Mm,
wasn't doing this work alone. She had a young person beside her out helping folks to register to vote. We
mm,
can't do this work without them. They have,
mm,
and I
mm.
think we as adults have to be willing to be led.
That's the key. I think that's the key. So one of the biggest frustrations, and I'm gonna be candid, is our and this is older adults wanting to speak more than we listen. Um, and
Yes.
I think that if we really are going to empower younger people, we need to close our mouths and open our ears
Oh gosh,
and
yes.
really listen to what it is that concerns them, what it is that moves them, and then what it is that can empower them. That is just good leadership. If you
That's right.
are looking towards future generations and trying to get them to lead, at some point, you're going to have to step
Hmm.
back and allow them to be the voice in the room. Because if you
That's right.
don't, you start becoming someone who points fingers rather than cupping your hand over your ear and listening to folks.
Right.
And we really got to stop doing that if we really want to engage these young people,
Hmm.
because otherwise they will be unengaged, unempowered, and immobilized. And the future of our communities, the future of our country depends on their leadership. At some point, you got to lay that ego aside and say, you know what?
Hmm.
I'm just here to mentor and help you shine. I had my time to be able to do that. And the best way I can shine right now is to move you into a position to where you can lead well. Because it don't matter who
Hmm.
sits in the seat. What matters is that that seat is secure for the issue that we're working on, which is equity. I'm sorry to get on my soapbox there for a moment, but I
No,
really
it's
do feel
true.
like that's important for us. Yeah, yeah,
And they're closer to the pain, right? They're closer to the impact. So
yeah.
cycles, we got 4 year cycles, we got 2 year cycles. You don't see much change.
Mm,
What you see is the cumulative impact 10,
mm,
15, 20 years later. They're
mm,
going to be impacted
mm,
by these votes. Their children are going to policies that we're debating currently.
mm, mm.
They're less
Yeah.
less less likely to be at this age, right? And that ain't to like age us, right? Because it's plus something. But you know, hitting these streets for the sake of my child,
Mm,
uh,
mm.
impacted by what
Yeah.
I do today, as opposed to how much life I got left to be impacted.
Mm,
And I think that's the thing that we have to remember as well. We like to say the young not motivated, they don't, they don't want to be involved. I know that's the case, because there's not anything that we've done that has not involved young. So I don't know how
mhm,
true that is. I think a
mm,
part of that is some of us uh, think we know better and think that we you have to have a posture of learning with young people, and I don't know that present in such a way.
mm. Charmaine is preaching in the chat. Glenn
What is
has a gatekeeping problem when it comes to service, and it hurts all of us. Ooh, yeah,
amen?
those gatekeepers, Charmaine. You know about them. We know about them. And I think that's one of the biggest hindrances for progress is to be able to do that. And you also have to check your own heart. You don't want to become a gatekeeper yourself, right? And I think that each one of us needs to draw on the knowledge experience of those before us. Those before us need to draw on the passion and the zeal of those who are going behind us. And that collective effort needs to happen because once you start to fracture, not enough power. You know what I'm saying? So I always use the flashlight analogy because I think that sometimes people think if we spread our light, that it has the biggest impact. But if you're trying to shine in darkness, you're going to need a focused light. And when it comes to doing this work, doing the work that we're equipped to do, I think we're going to have to focus our light. And that focused light means that everybody coalesces around one thing that needs to be done in our community and shines it in the dark places. Because if you spread your light, the darkness won't dissipate. But man, once you focus it, I think that we will be empowered to make the change that we need to. But that means cooperation, collaboration, and you take us taking that ego and just throwing it to the side and say, it's for the greater good. This is what we're gonna do. This is what we're gonna do. I think I lost my sister Shamika. But so I think she wanted me to make a couple of announcements to you all. See if she'll pop back on here in just a second. But I want to make sure you all are aware that we are continuing our dialogue around these conversations, and we're going to be having watch parties, not this weekend because we got a Super Bowl with one of Brunswick's own who is playing in the game. So from a Glenn County native, go Eagles. And so we're not going to be doing it this Sunday. On the 19th, we're going to be having a watch party around the second episode, which is the episode on race. And this episode is very, very deeply troubling, but also empowering as well. So I want to make sure that everybody tunes in to come through on the 19th as we talk about race, because we're going to talk about maternal health in the Black community. And it is definitely a heavy conversation, but I know that we're working on some stuff to get Shamika and others who kind of work in that space pretty proactively to be able to this conversation. So please, 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 if you're in Glenn County, y'all need to come through on the 19th. It's at the college, Coastal Georgia Community College. Do we know what time it starts again, Shamika? What time was that?
It starts o'clock.
6 o'clock? 6 o'clock?
Yeah, so 6
Yeah.
to 7 and the last hour the discussion.
Yep. Okay, so 6 or 7, and then discussion from 7 to 8, which was so rich last time around. Y'all missed this. I think this is going to be a good start to an ongoing, not just conversation, but movement to move us towards greater equity in our community. Did I miss anything, Shamika, in terms of the updates before we head out?
I don't think so. We'll be
Okay.
back here
Well, this has been back here next week, next Thursday.
mhm.
Okay. So we'll be back on next Thursday around the same time, lunchtime. We know that y'all might not watch this live. So those of you who are watching this on the other side of it, make sure you share it. Get people excited about this documentary as we do these watch parties. We're not doing them just to watch them, but we want to equip you all and help you all move towards action. We're going to be giving away books at each one of these events. We got the ABG library of books that help you work through these conversations. And they're free, so you can come by and pick up a book and have a good conversation with some folks who really are interested in helping to impact our community in positive ways. But next week we're going to be on. Go ahead.
Next, I was going to say that I want to highlight some of the books that we gave out last week that's being there.
Oh, right.
So you want to start to build your life some highlighted the episode last week. We had a medical apartheid, a really good book to introduce some of what you'll hear in the episode race, how the word is passed by Clint's. It's about the racialized history of slavery in America. So many books. We had the color that was available. That was about it's redlining, the racialized history of wealth building, of home ownership. Oh gosh, so many push out book about the juvenile system and how it disproportionately affects children, but in particular girls. So y'all get the point.
Yep.
Some of the great books that we'll have another. We'll have some at each student. They're free, as John mentioned.
Yep, free. Now, what ain't free is this T-shirt that Shamika has on. Somebody mentioned in the chat that they needed it, so I just wanted to make sure that you all know. You can go over to betterglen.org, click on our merch store, and the shirt is in the store. You can grab that shirt, support our work, and also wear it around town. Again, that shirt involves some of our local history around the struggle and around equity work, and we'd love for you to rock the ABG merch for sure. So go over to betterglen.org, click on the merch store, and grab you a copy, Mr. Charles. Appreciate you for your support. Outside of that, though, I'm excited about continuing these conversations, Shamika. I think they're helpful and kind of help us to debrief and then think about how we can best support the work in and around our community.
That's right.
All right. So we'll see y'all next go round, and we're going to see y'all on the 19th as we talk about race at the Coastal Georgia Community College. All right.
Yes.
See y'all later.
Take care.